Bonjour tout le monde. Ça nous fait évidemment, l'ambassadeur Hillman et moi, plaisir de vous parler en direct de Washington. On vous parle aujourd'hui à la suite d'une longue semaine de rencontres. On a commencé nos rencontres à Détroit. Ensuite de ça, on est allé évidemment vers Cleveland. On est revenu du côté de Calgary. Ensuite de ça, on est allé du côté d'Atlanta et finalement ici à Washington où on a rencontré au cours de la semaine des gouverneurs, des maires de différentes villes américaines, des gens d'affaires aujourd'hui. On a participé aussi à un grand sommet sur la résilience des chaînes d'approvisionnement. Et puis vraiment, le message, c'était de mettre en évidence cette relation stratégique entre le Canada et les États-Unis, la sécurité économique qui est la sécurité nationale. On a parlé aussi évidemment de prospérité économique, on a parlé de résilience. Et je vous dirais que c'est un message qui porte haut et fort, autant du côté républicain que du côté démocrate. So, just wanted to say, well, obviously delighted to with Ambassador Hillman, which is representing Canada here in Washington. We had a week of meetings with a number of officials. We started in Windsor, we went to Detroit, then we went to Cleveland, went back to Calgary, went back to Atlanta, and here in Washington, D.C. We met with mayors, we met with governors, we met with business people, we met with experts which are either close to the Republican or the Democrat. And the message is really about, this relationship should not be taken for granted. This is the essential relationship for the prosperity of both the Canada and the United States. One thing that resonates in Washington is that economic security is national security. And certainly our colleagues understand that my job and the job of the ambassador and Minister Ng, which is our co-chair with us, is to make sure that somehow we connect the dots, that we make sure that governors, for example, I was a governor of South Carolina saying, it's all great that you have a plant of BMW, but by the way, the aluminum used in the plant in South Carolina is coming from Canada. So we need to work together if you want to be resilient and making sure that these investments will be there for decades to come. So it's been great. I mean, we've been engaging with both sides, and I can say the message that we bring of Canada, of resiliency, of prosperity, of security is a message that is resonating. We did that very well over the last few days. We'll continue. This is Team Canada, and next week, obviously the House is sitting, but the following week will be in different cities across North America, and then in the Atlantic coast to meet with some premiers. So this is really Team Canada in action, live from Washington. So with that, turn over to you.
Thanks, Minister. Can you talk about what, if anything, Canada and the U.S. are doing to try to prevent, nickel and lithium from China and other critical minerals from flooding the market here? I know that's been a concern that Canada has raised with Australia previously. Is that a concern that you've been raising here? And if so, what specifically are Canada and the U.S. going to do about it?
Well, what I can tell you, and the ambassador has been a witness of that just a few hours ago, is that our American friends really understand that Canada gets it. Under the Invest in Canada Act, we've been blocking a number of potential takeover by Chinese companies of mining entities in Canada. And I think this has resonated here very well in Washington. People understand that we need to protect our economic security. We need to protect our critical supply chain when it comes to critical minerals. And the fact that Canada has been so aligned in making sure that we look at these very specific supply chains, semiconductor, critical minerals, biomanufacturing in a strategic way. I can tell you, we were just in a meeting, they said, Minister, not only it's true, but I think even the ranking member of the Senate Intelligence Committee praised Canada for taking the issue of national security and strategic supply chain so seriously and making sure that we take all the actions with what we've done. I think that's a message that resonates very, very well here in Washington.
Are there further actions that Canada and the U.S. are working on together on this, or is that still yet to be seen?
Well, listen, it's a good question. Yesterday, the ambassador and I, we co-hosted a dinner with a number of senators, and we talked about that kind of cooperation between the process in the United States and the one we have in Canada, making sure that we don't only look at transaction one by one, but we look at the ecosystem as a whole and how we can, because we are joined at the hip in that, in the sense that what we're deciding today is going to have an impact for generations to come when it comes to critical minerals, when it comes to semiconductor. And I can tell you, even some senators have even suggested that I should come and talk to the Senate Intelligence Committee so that we work together on these things. But I think the message we brought, Ambassador, was one that our colleagues were very happy to read, and they really understood that Canada and the United States are joined up when it comes to these critical supply chain. Sir?
Ambassador, on pension investments, curious here if the federal government thinks that it's appropriate to dictate standards for public pension plans or funds or Canadian funds to invest in Canadian companies to boost the economy, and if so, how would it be done?
Well, listen, this is not a new topic. This is something that I think Minister Freeland has been highlighting. Certainly, I think people are looking at the pension fund we have in Canada. They're among the best in the world. You see, for example, I look at CDPQ in Quebec, which has not only been providing returns for their shareholders, but also has been a catalyst for a number of investments we've seen in Quebec, but also beyond in Canada. I think it's very interesting because at the end of the day, our pension funds, and we've seen great examples of investments that not only have provided returns, but also that have been helping to strengthen our economy and bringing growth. And there's models also around the world with that. But, you know, it's an early discussion, but certainly it is interesting that we consider that as we look at these very capital-intensive projects that provide returns for generations.
What reassurances then can be provided to pension fund executives that are hesitant or see hesitancy in this?
Well, listen, this is early discussions that is going on. My colleague, Minister Freeland, is leading that effort. But I think it is a good discussion to have, and certainly, you know, discussing, consulting, looking at the ecosystem and what's, you know, best practice in the sector. I think it's the right thing to do. You know, Canadian pension funds are recognized around the world. I was at COP21. I mean, they were there. People recognize them for everything they've been doing. The question is, could there be more done in Canada, and what would be the impact, and how do you need to structure that? That's kind of the discussion that is happening, and I think it's a good one to have.
Minister, you talked about economic security being national security. We're going to get a pretty classic example of that tomorrow, when that House of Representatives is going to vote on a major piece of legislation that would either force the divestment or banning of TikTok, a Chinese-owned social media app. So I guess I have a two-part question for you and for the Canadian government on this. And one is, does the Canadian government support the idea of forcing the divestment or banning of TikTok? And second of all, have you started to consider the potential implications for the app in Canada if it's banned here in the United States?
I may let the ambassador on the first part of the U.S. and I'll comment on the government of Canada if you want.
Yeah, I think just on the U.S. side, obviously, as you know, this is a very important and powerful initiative that they're moving forward. I think that there's a fair bit, as we saw at this dinner that we had yesterday, which was a bipartisan dinner, the issue of misinformation, disinformation, influence on young people is really front of mind in the U.S. Senate. So they're definitely out in front on that, and they're eager to engage with us and ask questions about how that's being perceived in Canada, not only in that field, but across social media platforms where we might find that there are messages that are coming out that are not truthful or that are manipulative, in particular for young people, but for all of society. So I think this has got to be an area that we work with our closest ally on. This is a difficult and very challenging and multifaceted issue, and we won't be able to be effective unless we're working with them, and they are, as you point out quite rightly, very seized of the issue.
Well, the ambassador said it very well. I may just add, it was not lost on our U.S. friends. For example, the new policy directive that I've issued around, for example, video games, because we need to understand when we look at the ecosystem of social media, it goes well beyond some of these platforms. As the ambassador said rightly, is looking at this whole ecosystem. We're going to be watching closely what they're going to be doing here. Certainly, we had a good exchange with our colleagues. They were very pleased to see that we had moved, for example, on these video games. to make sure, and medium that would be alike video games. And they understand one thing, and that's why it goes to the core of what I'm saying, is that this is not just we're not just kind of the friendly Canadians of the North. We are a strategic partner for economic security and national security. And I think in the world which is fraught with uncertainty and instability, stability, predictability, and the rule of law come in high demand and short supply. But one thing that our folks here understand is that Canada is the best possible partner, and we are very much aligned in terms of making sure that we take the right decision today that would protect, the key supply chain we have, but also more broadly when you talk about different sphere of the economy. We're very aligned and live on our discussion with our American friends.
We'll take one last one.
Well, just as a follow-up, just wanted to know, but just to just pursue that line of questioning on whether the Canadian government is elaborating its own policy on whether this social media company should be divested or banned.
Listen, we've done a lot with respect to that. We're always looking at what our partners and allies around the world are doing. Like I said, I took action recently when it comes to video game and issuing guidelines. I think we've always at the forefront of that, engaging with eyes wide open. So we'll be looking, we'll be watching what our friends are doing here at the Capitol, and certainly we're going to continue to look at what's being done around the world and make sure we protect the interest of Canadians at every step of the way. Merci tout le monde. Merci tout le monde.